Hello and welcome to the Tumult Hype 4 beta. Hype 4 has a lot of new features to improve your creative capabilities for making animations and interactive pieces. Before we begin though, let me reiterate that this is beta software. While we've done some testing, there may be issues that you encounter, so please keep backups of all your existing documents. Know that documents made with the Hype 4 beta can't be opened in a previous Hype 3 version. And also, it's really important that you file any issues with us. You can email us at betafeedback@tumult.com, but the best way is to use the in-app report an issue feature. So you can give us a summary, steps to reproduce that are very helpful, and you can also attach documents and add logs. So this feature is really the absolute best way to report issues to us. If you'd like to discuss the Hype 4 beta, you should be invited to the private category on the forums, and so this gives you special access to discuss with us and other users any of the features, and so you can kind of talk about it. I'd love to see any creations that you make here. And so that's the Hype 4 beta, and I'd like to get started by introducing all the features individually. So number one is animated vector shapes. To insert a vector shape, just go to the toolbar menu. You can choose vector shape or press the V command, and this will put you into a vector editing mode. So you can create individual points, drag out curves, and if you go back to the first point, you can close a path. Escape or hitting the V key again will get you out of the vector edit mode, and if you want to go back into it, you can double click in or choose edit and edit element. Similar to motion paths, you can select anywhere on a line and kind of drag out a new vertex that way. You can manipulate the control points. If you just drag a control point, that goes into a mirrored mode. If you hold down Option, that will be symmetric. And if you use the Command key, that will be asymmetric, so you can edit each individual point as it is. If you click a vertex and hit the Option key while clicking, that will make it a control point, or you can hold Option to drag out other control points. You can use the Command key to multiple select and manipulate them, or delete if you want. I just undid there. And so that's the basics of editing a vector shape. Now where Hype really shines, of course, is in doing animation. So I'm just going to make a basic diamond shape and kind of get rid of that curve there. So now I have a diamond. And in Hype, you can use the basic Hype animation system. So now I'm in record mode. And let's say I want to change this to a heart. So, I set the playhead to where I want. And now I can manipulate my vertices for the shape. So I'll just move that one down and drag out some control points to give it a nice heart. Whoops, give it a nice heart shape. So now we've got the heart. And that produces in animation. And so you can see that in Hype, but you can also see that in the browser. And so that's animating from one shape to another. Now that had the same number of vertices, but this also will work with a different number of vertices. So I'll record a new shape from this heart, and I'll go with the poker theme, so I'll try to make like a club, and I'm actually kind of terrible with doing vector shapes, so this is going to be kind of crude, but we'll get there. Maybe it's looking a little bit more like a palm tree, but it's the main point is you don't actually need the same number of vertices to animate from one shape to the next, and Hype will do the best that it possibly can to do that animation. So we have it going to the heart, and now we have it going to the club. Now, it may be the case that taking kind of an existing path and trying to manipulate the shape as I did is not the best way to do it. So you can actually take another shape that maybe you made separately, and you can copy that element, and when you're actually recording and have gone into vector editing mode, if you paste at that point, that will paste the shape data into the existing shape. And so now we can have an animation that morphs between the diamond, the heart, the club, and now even Batman. So the hype shape morphing works, generally speaking, with hype's animation system. So here I have some animated emoji, and I have kind of 3 different relative timelines that go between different states. So I can start in this kissy state, and I can animate to the anguish or the angry, and it actually doesn't matter because these are relative timelines. So wherever I start out is where it's going to animate from. And so this is a really powerful way just to get from one shape to another shape using relative timelines. Now there are some different options that you can use to manipulate these shapes, so I'm just going to make maybe a simple line. So the first thing is that you can of course change the background fill style. You can also change like the border width and things like the border color if you want. And there are some specific vector shape options, such as changing the line cap, which is how the line kind of looks at the end of it, or how lines are joined together. So you can see that's going to be square or rounded. Hype also has the ability to change the dashing of an element. So here we have an element, and we could dash for, let's say, 20 pixels on, and let's say 20 pixels off. Oops, that was 30, that's 20. And one of the really cool effects is doing like line animations. So you can change the offset and actually change how they're drawn. This is used as a technique, I think it's called Vivis. That's a library that lets you kind of animate these in and out. And so what you would do is you take the length, and you can actually see the length of the line by like hovering over the dash. That's a little bit of a hack right now. So you can type that in and have kind of the on and off be the length of the line. And if you set the offset, now we've got just like the off part that's shown, but we can actually hit record and make an animation that kind of animates that offset so that the line kind of builds in based on the offset. And so you can see that drawing. And so you can get pretty creative and clever. It's kind of one path per element, but you can do a bunch of different paths. So here's one that I did using the hype logo that builds in using this line animation effect. And you can see it's pretty compelling and interesting way to build things in. So one other thing is that these shapes will work with the physics engine. So here I have a bunch of shapes, and I'm going to set them to be dynamic physics bodies, and this is a static physics body. And you can see that these are concave shapes even, so pretty advanced physics. And so you can see that you can kind of make arbitrary shapes and have it interact with physics, which is a lot of fun. So that is animated vector shapes. Number 2. Sprite sheet and image sequence import. So sprite sheets and image sequences are generally things that you would make using other software or maybe doing hand-drawn animation. And let's say you want to bring in a bunch of frames and have those interact with Hype's animation system. So you can add these via the insert menu and choose sprite sheet. And so you can choose a sprite sheet, which is just a bunch of like series of images that are brought in. And this opens up the sprite sheet editor where you can define kind of how many images are in here. So this one has 4 rows and 4 images, and you can see it now lines up, although the bottom one is actually a blank frame. So you can control the number of frames to be 15 instead of 16. In this case, maybe I know that this is supposed to be 15 frames per second, so I can do that. I've got it set to loop. And so now I've inserted the sprite sheet, and I can use the transform mode to scale this up if I want. And so now I can play back the sprite sheet animation that's animating based on Hype. Along with sprite sheets, Hype can also get image sequences in the same way. So let's say you have a ping sequence of a lot of different images. You can kind of select all of those, open it up, and this is actually going to build a sprite sheet for you. So it'll automatically get the right number of rows and columns. And so I can insert that. And now, just like that, I have a image sequence animation. This, of course, looks maybe a little bit too fast for what it is. So what I can do is I can say edit sprite sheet with that selected in the element inspector, and I can, after the fact, even change some of these values, such as the frames per second. And so I have this. Maybe this one's a little bit slower. Maybe I should choose 15. But you can see you can do all kinds of different animations and sprite sheets in this method. Number 3, page turn scene transition. So in the top request has been a smooth way to get from one scene to another. Previously, you would do a swipe and then it would do a scene transition, but now like iBooks or Kindle animations, you can actually get that to be smooth. And it's done much the same way. You would take a on swipe left or a on swipe right action in the scene inspector, and you do the same jump to scene, but instead of doing the push transition, these specifically in the scene inspector have a page turn option. And so this lets you kind of drag and have the nice smooth animation. So I've added this to the other scene, so now you can see as I drag and click, it's entirely smooth, and you can kind of flick it. You also see that the animation on the initial scene continues to play, and then when you transition, when the transition's done, the next scene will play animations at that point. This also works not just going left and right, but you can also do this swiping up and down as well. So here I have one where you can swipe up or swipe down to do that transition. Number 4, drop shadows. Previously in Hype, if you wanted to add a drop shadow, it was kind of on the box element, so it was like a rectangular outline. But this donut actually has alpha values, and so by changing from box shadow to drop shadow, you can take into account those alpha values, and so you can actually manipulate the shadow that way. It even works in something like a donut shape where there's a hole. Number 5, skew. So skew transformation can simply be applied by going to the metrics inspector and going to the skew section, and you can change the X or the Y values of the skew, get maybe a couple zany effects. If you want to change where the skew is occurring from, you would use the transform origin. So you can command click and then drag that down, and now where the skew occurs is based on that origin point. And you may think this is a little bit crazy of an effect, but it really can have a profound impact on animations. So here I have this box moving across the ground, and you can see I applied a skew as it moves, which gives it a little bit more kind of a physical feeling. And when it hits the little object on the ground, kind of stops and overshoots that. I'm using a transform function. And so you can see how that really added a pretty nice effect to give it kind of a wibbly-wobbly behavior. Number 6, external editing of resources. So when you drag an asset into Hype, it makes a local copy. And previously, if you edited the original copy, Hype would try to keep track of that and say, hey, you edited this outside of Hype, do you want to recopy the version inside? But there was no real way to edit the assets that were already within Hype, which can come in handy. So here we have a jellyfish, and we can select in the resource library and say edit in Adobe Photoshop. And in Adobe Photoshop, I'll just do Command U and bring up the kind of hue saturation mixer, and maybe change this. And when I click Save, Hype automatically picks that up and just replaces the asset automatically. Now this is good with like image formats, but again, the other workflow worked pretty well. Where I think it really comes in handy is with scripts and HTML. So here I'll add JavaScript, and instead of using Hype's editor, you can of course edit this in the text editor of your choice. I like BBEdit. So here I can actually type some JavaScript, and again, as I save this, Hype will automatically pick it up and import that. So now you can use a different editor if you want. This document does have some head HTML, and that doesn't show up in the resource library, but the trick is you can control-click the button, and then you get an Edit In menu there, and so you can edit the head HTML just as you would any other asset. So make your changes, go ahead and save it, go back to Hype, and you'll notice that it's been updated. So that's external resource editing. Number 7, JavaScript math equation timing functions. So in Hype, you've always been able to customize or change your timing functions, and you can even change the curves in Hype Pro if you want. But sometimes this isn't really necessarily the effect you want for a timing function. There are some cool different ways that you can do timing functions using mathematics. So here we have a page that uses all kinds of different trigonometric functions to give kind of various different shape pulses. So this is one thing that you can do. And so now in Hype 4, you can choose math equation, and you can actually type JavaScript code here. So I'll do a math.cosine function. And so now I have a nice little wave effect. And this code is actually run for every single frame to generate what the adjusted percent complete value should be. And so you can see that in action. That's running a nice cosine wave. Number 8, Physics API. Hype's physics engine under the hood is a great open source library called Matter.js. Previously, Hype kind of insulated this fact, but in Hype 4, we're exposing the API. So here I have a document that's a physical simulation. It's two balls bouncing, two dynamic bodies hitting a static body. And what I'd like to do is use some Matter.js physics features. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the bodies to be static so that when I hit the drop button, that's when my code is going to be invoked. You can do this a bunch of different ways. So here I have code, and when the button's clicked, what I'll do is I'll get the elements, and I have the getElementProperty API to get the physics body. And this is kind of like the Matter.js physics object. I can also get the physics engine, and then using those, I can add a constraint. So now I'm like in Matter.js code land. This is not Hype code. This is the Matter.js API. And so I can kind of constrain the two objects, add it to the world. And the final step is I can set the physics body type using the setElementProperty to be dynamic, which kind of turns it on and activates it. So this is mixed using Matter.js and using a little bit more Hype API. Now when I run it, you'll see the balls are constrained. So you can see that there's that kind of connection between the two elements that I used with the physics API. Now in the course of doing this, you may need to kind of debug or visualize what you're doing. And so you can, at the beginning, set the Hype debug physics property to true. And if you make the background transparent, you can get a lot more kind of debug information. And so this will show what the physics engine is kind of doing under the hood. And so now when I click drop, you can see there's that constraint between the two physics objects. So that's what's new in Tumult Hype 4, specifically in the beta. And you know, as we do the beta, features may change, but we'd love to get your feedback on what we have. Again, if you encounter anything, whether you think it's a bug or not a bug, please file it. Duplicates for us are much better than a bug going unnoticed, because what hits you and may be obvious might not be to us, or it might be to everyone, but it wasn't to us and we didn't file it. So please, anything unusual or just feedback, please file. We'd love to see it. And again, I'd love to see your creations, and I hope you make really cool stuff with the Tumult Hype 4 beta. Thank you.